Hello, strangers. But it's funny, because you look kind of familiar. I tend to tell stories that I'm about 99.9% convinced are true. Be that because I was there, or I really trust the person who told me. But that's not to say some of my friends don't bring tall tales. And this one is taller than most. Here's story 158. A friend of mine had gone out of town for a month one winter. She lived in a pretty upscale little complex of townhouses and asked me to house sit while she was away. I was living at home with my mom at the time, so it was a welcome vacation. I quickly settled into her little townhouse. I slept in the second bedroom and basically hung out in the downstairs living room in the evenings when I got off work. Aside from the main job, make the house look like someone was home, discouraging burglars, there were a few other chores to the job. Watering houseplants. My friend was full on in her plant mom era, and the monstera and peace lilies were everywhere. There was also tidying up after myself, taking out the trash, and picking up her mail. The complex had one centralized bank of mailboxes. They were stainless steel, and all homes had a box assigned to them. The mailboxes locked, so each resident had to carry their own specific key to get to their mail, crouching under the little roof over the top of the boxes, built to keep them out of the bright sun in the summer and drizzling rain of that winter. The mailboxes for the entire complex were in the same place, in the first row of homes you'd see when you drove past the front gates. Convenient for those who lived near the front of the property, but my friend's townhouse was near the last row in the back. In the near constant rain of the season, that was a miserable walk. What I ended up doing was stopping at the mailboxes first thing when I got off work, then driving back through the maze of houses to my friends. I got pretty good at remembering to stop for the mail, if only because walking back through the darkened community in the cold, wet weather, and having to claw out her mail and try to shield it from the rain with my coat for the long walk back was such a pain. Yet, on the last week of my stay, I nearly forgot. It had been a terrible shift at work, just dumpster fire emergency after dumpster fire emergency. My head pounded with a tension headache. I only saw the mailboxes and remembered them when my headlights flashed on their chrome faces, and I hit the brakes. I felt my heart stop as the car floated a little, hydroplaning before finally stopping with a shudder. Ugh, I thought. That's definitely just the cherry on top of the crap Sunday this day has been. I backed up, then stopped the car at the little bank of mailboxes as I'd done for weeks now, but then paused. I looked around. For a split second, I'd had the feeling I was being watched. I squinted out the windshield, then glanced out the driver's side window. The rain hadn't stopped for days, but in the few overhead lights the complex owners had installed, I looked about and didn't see anyone nearby. I waited for a few seconds, thinking maybe the wet screech of my brakes had attracted passing attention, but that creepy crawly feeling of being watched remained. It did not improve my mood. All I wanted was to bury myself in blankets and cuddle up on the couch to sand off the hellish day I'd had with some mindless TV, not sit here in the rain, giving myself the creeps. That's what got me moving, wanting to just get this over with. The sooner I did, the sooner I could be back in the townhouse, drowning my sorrows with a pint of Halo Top. I parked my car and jumped out, leaving it running and the driver's side door ajar as I scarpered to the mailbox. My friend had a few packages mixed in with her regular mail, but lucky for me, They were small enough to not require being put in one of the larger lockers and opened with a separate key. Still, it took me a few seconds extra to stack her mail. It had the usual suspects: her magazines, mailers, random thank you and fundraising letters from the charities she supported, animals, homeless shelters, typical do-gooder stuff in crisp white envelopes. These were scattered in with some advertisement flyers for flavor, and the couple of packages that I had to stack and restack well enough so I wouldn't drop any of them in the puddles around me. I was nervous, though. That spooky feeling, like I could feel the weight of someone's eyes on me, tracing over my body. It just didn't stop. I looked up and around a couple of times, but again, there was no movement, no people I could see, just the dark skies and the constant raindrops flying past, a bit angled due to the wind. Finally satisfied that I had all of her mail in a tight grip, I turned on heel, ran to the car, threw the mail over my shoulder to the back seat, and slammed the car door, hitting the lock button instantly. Then I peered through the windshield again and groaned. I'd left her mailbox door open. What a moron. I still felt like someone was staring at me, but that feeling was being drowned out by the discomfort of the damp cold and the rising frustration of a long, bad day at work. This one simple thing was the only roadblock between me and my blankets. Letting loose a string of curse words, I got out of the car, stamping angrily over to the mailbox to slap it shut. Then I stormed back to my car. There, done. Now I can go home, finally, because her mail is... As I thought that, my eyes flitted to the rearview mirror to glance at the back seat, confirming her mail was where I left it. And the thought died right there, because the mail wasn't the only thing in the back seat. There was a girl sitting there, eyes locked on mine in the reflection of the rearview mirror. I jumped, letting out a cry, but unable to tear my eyes away from hers. I began sputtering, asking first, how? Then who? Then what? If I'd had a few more moments, I might have been able to string those into a single thought, a single sentence, but my mind was skipping like a scratched CD in a Discman, skipping between tracks of thought. When I felt the cool metal press against the back of my neck, though, my mind went completely blank. "Drive," she said. With a shaking hand, I put the car in reverse and began to drive. Terror gripped me, catching my breath, squeezing my lungs so I couldn't but breathe in half puffs. Yet I was scared beyond belief that if I jerked or moved or breathed too much, the metal to the back of my neck would go from cold to hot as a bullet ripped through it. So preoccupied was I that I was riding the horse, driving on autopilot through the complex, back to my friend's house. No, I couldn't let this girl know where she lived. Was this a robbery? I kept glancing back at the girl in the mirror. Her eyes never left mine, but her face, her mouth, her eyebrows didn't look nervous or crazy. She looked unbothered, bored even. And that scared me most of all. If she was angry or cautious, that would give me some comfort, knowing that she was just as likely to mess up. But boredom, that begot practice and knowledge, maybe even a plan of how tonight was going to go, all made up already in her mind, behind that pale mime mask of a face. And if I did something that didn't go according to her plan, my heart beat in my throat. I coasted the car past my friend's townhouse. I kept driving. My eyes darted back to the girl in the back seat, scanning her for any posture change in the rearview mirror. But there was nothing. No change. She sat perfectly still, her pale face trained forward. From what I could see of the rest of her, she had long, muddy brown hair, parted in the middle and hanging loose to her upper arms. She wore a dark gray sweater, loose enough to be shapeless, and beyond that, the edge of the rearview mirror cut it off. No tattoos, no streaks of vibrant hair color. She didn't look rough in the way that not having a home, or maybe having not legal habits, can age you. She looked like she'd come straight off a school bus. She would have blended in perfectly with any high school class. The way predators can camouflage themselves amongst their prey, the thought zipped across my mind. As though she now felt my eyes on her, the way hers had been on me, her eyebrow raised. "Yes," I startled, asking her, "What?" "Continue driving, away from here." What could I say? My brain was shell-shocked and my tongue sticky in my dry mouth. I drove on out of the complex and down the dark roads. If this wasn't a robbery, what was it? While the complex was pretty fancy, it was isolated out of the normal commercial shopping area of town. The selling point was that it was peaceful and quiet. The streetlights were sporadic, and only in brief flashes could I glance back and see the girl who'd taken me hostage. Otherwise, the back seat and its occupant were bathed in shadow. Now that she'd been in the car, and I'd had a few minutes to breathe, to calm my rapiding heart, my mind was still shuffling through questions like flashcards that had no answers. What was going on? Where were we going? Why? As though she could hear my thoughts, her calm, low voice crawled up my ear. "Look." I jolted in my seat again, the steady cold of the metal against my neck feeling like an ice cube, telling me not to push it, not to ask. But I didn't have to. She continued speaking. "It was luck that you happened along, and that you happened to be leaving. I needed to leave, get away from," and here her placid little mask wrinkled just by her mouth. "Her." That word was spat more than said, intonating that whoever was meant by her was hated. I played along. Isn't that what they tell you to do in a hostage situation? Play along. I asked, "Get away?" Was she? And here I paused because I nearly said, "Holding you hostage." And that similarity to what this teen was doing to me might have set her off, sent her trigger finger pulling. "She wanted to hurt me." As she said this, we passed another streetlight. It glimmered through the hang of her brunette hair, illuminating the left side of her face. While her eyes were cast down at her lap, I could see the outline of a dark shape around her eye, slightly yellow-green. "She wanted to hurt me, and she did." Despite my terror, I felt something like concern beginning to warm up in my chest. While she'd scared the literal hell out of me, was it possible that she'd also been scared, on the run from something equally terrifying? My car idling in the rain, the dome light illuminated with the door popped open, shining out to her in the dark. I opened my mouth to ask further, but then she spoke again. "I hurt her instead." Another passing streetlight. Her eyes snapped up to lock onto mine again in the rearview mirror. I saw again her mouth wrinkle. It didn't move like a mouth of flesh and blood. It moved like paper crumpling and flexing. It doesn't just look like a mask, I thought. It is a mask. The hollow around her eye that I'd taken as a faded bruise was mirrored on the other eye, outlining the lines of where her sockets would be, cups in the bone of her skull. It was pale, darker shadowed around her features, especially her mouth, the mouth that despite the paper wrinkling effect, was now smiling sweetly at me. I'd wanted to get her talking, maybe build a connection between us, but that little detail made my hopes plummet. They usually do want to hurt me. Some do more than want. She sighed, but her face no longer looked bored, growing into something like amused. They don't seem to like it happening to them instead, though. Isn't that funny? I drove, my hands feeling alternately chilled and slippery. The heat in my car wasn't penetrating the chill of my sweaty palms. "Oh," I said. I had no idea what to say or do anymore. My heart was racing, and it was all I could do to just keep looking ahead, piloting the car down the gray road into the shadows on the horizon. I glanced at the fuel gauge. About 3/4 of a tank. We could drive for hours. How far would we go? And what would happen when we got there? There. She spoke again, crisply. I blinked my eyes back to the rearview mirror and caught the corner of her mouth curling, tearing like paper. But she was telling me to pull over at a rest station along the road. Sweet Lord in heaven. Basically the perfect backdrop for this evening. It too was swamped in the mist of rain, gray and foreboding. One single yellow wall sconce light stuck out from under the eaves of the block structure like a golden tooth. The crime scene tape will match, my idiot brain decided to add as I pulled over, parking in the deserted lot. I clenched my jaw, then flicked my eyes back to the rearview mirror to lock eyes once more with the girl. I was certain this was it. This was where the cold metal of the barrel of her unseen gun would erupt in fire and hot lead. The least I could do was stare back at her, make her see the eyes of the woman she killed. Not that she seemed like she'd be all that bothered. Where we sat, her face was in shadow. I only had the impression of the elements of her face. Eyebrows, eyes, nose, mouth. But as I watched, she raised her left hand, the one not currently training a gun, to the back of my head. She held it up into view of the mirror, and in that hand, she held something. It was a piece of mail, the mail I'd picked up from my friend. Specifically, one of those long white business envelopes. I squinted before I realized I was doing so, trying to read it before glancing back to her face again. It was still in the shadows, but I got the impression she was smiling patiently as she pushed the envelope forward into the light so I could almost read its backwards writing. She withdrew the letter, her paper-white hand withdrawing into the shadows again. A sound to my right jarred me, grabbed my attention away from the girl in the back seat. To our right, a slick black SUV had pulled in, and the driver's side door popped open, expelling a large man dressed in business formal, full suit, blonde hair slicked back like it was wet. He slammed the door and rushed to the building before us, his hand coming up over his shoulder to lock his car with a brassy beep beep. I looked back to the rearview mirror. She was sitting there in the shadows still. Her free hand was now smoothing her sweater, but she paused as my eyes fell on her reflection. "Thank you for the ride." My brain was tripping, stumbling. All I could eke out was, "You're welcome." In response, I felt the cold kiss of metal at the back of my neck retreat. Yet I was still frozen. My mind was connecting where we'd stopped, with the SUV next to us, but it was refusing to finish the thought. All at once, she leaned forward, and in the rearview mirror I saw her face, her full face, for the first time. And I nearly screamed. It was paper white like her hand, save a cheesy yellow-green like wrought on white cheese at the edges of her features. But her eyes, making my stomach feel like water. They were black, completely black. No irises, no whites, just pupils, glimmering, reflecting specks of light like foam on a dark sea. And she spoke again, training those horrible eyes on me. "You don't need what I do." She cocked her head, and that dark gash of her mouth smiled broader. I swear I could hear paper ripping as she did. "Not tonight, anyway." And with a flick, she tossed the envelope she'd shown me up onto my dash. My eyes followed it, but even as my hand darted out to catch it, clutch it, I whirled around to face her instead of just her reflection, finding the back seat empty, save the scattering of mail. To my right, the blat of the automatic unlock sounded. I turned and saw the large man was back in the driver's seat of his fancy SUV. He was already pulling out. I couldn't move, not even when he pulled forward to leave, and in the brief splash of that leprous light from the rest station on the backseat windows, I saw a shape. A very familiar silhouette. And I swear, I had the impression it was smiling. With a splash of water, he drove away, carrying his own surprise passenger into his own dark night. I sat there in that murky parking lot for a while, just trying to breathe without screaming. My hands were fidgeting, and I finally looked down to see what I was fidgeting with. The envelope I'd snatched off the dash. I turned it over. It was a standard business-sized envelope with prim black font addressing the letter to my friend. And the return address stamp? One of the many charities that she contributed to. Specifically, a charity for kids. I'm not certain what it says about me, that at this point, I can actually rank stories about black-eyed children on a scale of realism. But then again, it's been a crazy life. If you'd like to get in touch or share a story from your past, email and socials are on the screen and in the description. Liking, commenting, and/or sharing this video feeds some sort of algorithm monster that lives under YouTube's bed. So they say. And otherwise, I'll see you again soon. Stay strange, stay safe, and take care, strangers.